Hi, and welcome back to Gender Studies. Now, last week we looked at gendered verbal communication. This week we're going to explore the gender nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication are all elements of communication other than the words. Now, this can include your voice speed or tone, your facial movements, body movements, the use of space between people, as examples of nonverbal behavior. Now, scholars who've done research state that the majority, and that can range depending upon the research that you read, between 65 and 93% of the meaning that we use in communicating comes from the nonverbal behaviors like language and nonverbal communication. It is also related to culture and gender. Nonverbal communication conveys cultural meaning of gender, and both men and women use nonverbal communication to express themselves as gendered. Now, that will make more sense when we get further into this. This week, we're going to consider what function nonverbal communicators play in the conveying of message. That's communicating to one another. So we're going to start with functions of nonverbal communication. So what does it do? So one of the first things that nonverbal can do is supplement verbal communication. Now, what that means is nonverbal behavior supplements or adds to the verbal message in 5 different ways. So instead of using words, I could repeat my words, or I could nod my head up and down while saying yes, or saying correct, and pointing to the right or whatever. I can use my behavior in that manner. I can use it because it creates a contradiction, contradicting a verbal message. For example, if someone is smiling at me while they say I'm sorry, or saying I'm fine when I've asked them how are they doing and I notice that they're sobbing and they say, oh, I'm fine. It's contradiction. We can also use nonverbal communication as a complementing of verbal statements. Clapping your hands when you're happy and smiling while declaring excitement is just complementing the verbal excitement that you might be saying, or sealing the threat with a forceful glare. That is complementing. We can also use nonverbal behavior for replacing language. What if someone says something that really disgusts me? I don't have to say anything. I can just roll my eyes and they'll get an idea. Or if someone, says, asks me a question, I shrug my shoulders, they'll get an idea that maybe I don't know the answer. So it replaces language. It can also accent the verbal message by emphasizing certain words. Notice how I used accent, and I used an intonation in my voice. So voice volume, gestures can be examples. So another way we could use nonverbal is that we use it as nonverbal to communicate and to regulate interactions. So some of my communication nonverbally, I can either end a relationship or end a dialogue or begin one. It could be through eye contact. I keep good eye contact, and then if I lose interest, my eye contact might drift. You will get the message that maybe I'm not as interested anymore. So I can regulate the interaction through my eye contact, body position, body posture, vocal inflection cues, or others like that. When we want to speak and when we want them to speak, we can use these cues. So if I'm talking and then I pause and I don't say anything, but I'm still keeping my eye contact on you, it might mean that I'm waiting for your reply and it's your turn to talk. Women tend to use cues to invite and encourage others into conversations. Men tend to use more cues to maintain attention and discourage others from speaking, such as avoiding eye contact. The third use, or the third function, is to establish the relationship level of meaning. Now, this is a big one. There are 3 primary dimensions of relationship level meaning: responsiveness, liking, and power. Let's look at each one, and we'll start with responsiveness. Responsiveness is interest in the interaction and involvement with others. Now, this can include nonverbal cues indicating responsiveness like inflection in your tone of voice, eye contact, an open body posture, leaning in. Women tend to be more responsive than men. They tend to communicate with others more and respond to others' emotions more. Responsiveness differs by culture. Now, the second one we'll look at is liking. Liking is demonstrated through verbal cues such as vocal warmth, sitting close to others, touching, or holding eye contact. Now, girls and women tend to be socialized more strongly than boys and men to communicate liking because they are socialized to be nice to others and build relationships. Dislike is communicated non-verbally as well. You can throw a frown at somebody, glare, or turn away, and these would be ways of showing you're not engaged, you don't like. Power is the third. Power or control is the extent to which people are seen as equal to, dominant over, or differential to others. Now, differential just means that you have deferred to the person who has the authority. Now, the three primary ways we communicate power are through voice, touch, and the use of space. For example, men tend to talk louder and with more inflection than women in order to demonstrate some degree of power in the dynamic. They tend to take up more space and touch people more to communicate their status. For example, if a man who doesn't know you well, or if it's your boss, reaches around your shoulder to the other side, that feels completely different than to touch on your near shoulder and ask that same question, for example. This essentially gets to where we can see that nonverbal communication can and does function to communicate gender similarities and gender differences. We can now look at the forms or types of nonverbal communication. Now, many of these you'll be familiar with. However, we often don't consider our own nonverbal communication in the moment that it's occurring. It's somewhat a very big part of our communication style, but also it's almost something we hardly ever think about consciously. So let's look at some of these forms of nonverbal communication and see how many of these you're familiar with as being nonverbal, and then start thinking in terms of how does this affect you? In what way do you non-verbally communicate in this way? And the first one we're going to look at are artifacts. Now, what are artifacts? Well, they're the personal objects, things that you have in your bedroom, and you've been able to decorate it the way you want with the colors and the things that are in them. All those things you have in there that are yours, personal stuff, those are your artifacts. And they express your identity, how we view ourselves. It might be color, it could be the objects that you have, or the number of them. These can include colors, I said, types of toys, demonstrating appropriate behaviors and activities for either boys and girls, a building set for boys, dolls for girls. As we get older, we continue to have artifacts, and they represent who we are. We can also, in this area of artifacts, and then this is where I'm sure you have some awareness of, is clothing and other types of artifacts like that, which are less strict than in the past generations, but they still define women and men differently. Men's clothes tend to be a little less colorful and allow for more easy movement. Women's clothing calls attention to women's bodies with form-fitting styles and clinging materials. Selecting clothing is particularly challenging for trans and gender non-conforming people, as much of our clothing choices are binary, either or. There are some crossover points, maybe growing more, but still more difficult. Advertising emphasizes what artifacts men and women are supposed to use. Even so, some people use artifacts to challenge cultural prescriptions of masculinity and femininity. Men who might wear a dress, or women who will wear a suit and tie as an example of that. Another form, proxemics and personal space. These refer to how people use distance and space. Proxemics refer to how people use space. This includes the distance that you keep from each other, your own personal bubble. You might have a bubble that requires 3 feet between you and the other person, but that other person might have a bubble that requires 6 feet, or one who likes 1 foot. You'll know how that space is used, and it includes the distance we keep from each other. Norms about proximity are culturally constructed. Space, this is an index of power and a primary way to designate who's important and who's privileged. Other ways space is used is to include who sits at the head of the table and what mother's and father's space look like within their households, the man cave or the she shed. In this form, we can include territoriality. Territoriality is a personal space, but not everyone's territory is equally respected. People with more power have more control over the use of space. Men are more likely to go into a woman's space than a woman are to go into a men's space. Now, the third group we'll look at is what's called heptics. Haptics is the use of touch. It's a form, touch from parents or other adults communicate different messages to boys and girls. Parents tend to touch daughters more often and more gently than they touch boys, which teaches girls to expect touching from others. Boys are more likely to learn to associate touch with control and power. Females are more likely to initiate touch to express support, affection, and comfort, while men, they associate touch with control and power. Men are also more likely than women to use forceful touch, and many men are unaware of how strong they are, so some of that touch becomes violence and some of that is intended to be violence. Now, the fourth group, Kinesics. Now, this is the face and body motions that we experience. Women use kinesic behaviors including the head tilting, smiling, and condensing their bodies to take up less space. Masculine kinesic behavior includes using large gestures, taking up lots of space, entering others' territory. Women tend to make more eye contact during conversations than men do and signal interest and involvement. Now, a fifth form, and this is one that often doesn't get recognized as nonverbal, but it's clearly nonverbal. It's what's known as paralanguage. Paralanguage refers to vocal cues that accompany verbal communication, such as your voice inflection, tone, volume, accent, pitch, and rhythm. Not the words themselves, not the word and their precise meaning, but how the word is said. Male and female physiology doesn't fully explain the difference in pitch. Men tend to use lower pitch, higher volume, less inflection to gain and hold attention. Women tend to use softer pitch, lower volume, and more inflection to appear polite and caring. Now, these are socialized behaviors, means they're socially constructed. It's how we're taught, and not entirely a result of anything physiological that's different between men and women. Now, this next one, again, is one you may not always think about as nonverbal communicating, but of course it really is, and that's physical appearance. It refers to how a person looks. Western culture places a very high priority on physical appearance. Both sexes feel that pressure to conform to culturally defined ideals for appearance. Some polls indicate men are generally satisfied with their appearance and are less likely to connect appearance to their overall competence and value. However, as our culture increasingly emphasizes even male bodies, more men are attempting to gain an ideal muscular masculinity through either working out with lifting weights or worse, or not to say that lifting weights is bad, but may even be using steroids to gain those outcomes. Now, gay men are more likely to attach physical appearance to self-worth. Girls and women are more likely than men to feel pressure to look good all the time. Girls and women concerned about weight starts early, and this is terrible. By 3rd grade, 50 to 80% of the girls say they want to lose weight. Women make up between 85 and 95% of the people with eating disorders. Dissatisfaction with body size, particularly for Caucasian women, influences overall self-esteem. In general, African American women, particularly those with strong identity with their ethnic heritage, tend to be more satisfied with their bodies and less prone to eating disorders. Now, there are also differences between women and men's skill for interpreting nonverbal behavior. Generally, females are better able to decode nonverbal behavior and can more accurately perceive others' emotions. However, men are noticeably faster at recognizing angry facial cues. Now, various theories offer explanations for this strong ability to read feelings. The biological theorists, they posit that it's a result of sex-related brain differences. You remember the corpus callosum that separates the 2 lobes. Maybe their ability to cross over more easily and more efficiently can contribute to these things. The cognitive development and social learning theories, well, they state that females are encouraged to be sensitive to others and that to relationships from a very young age. They're socialized that way. Standpoint theory suggests women's ability to decode results from their standing as subordinate members of society. Respecting gender styles of nonverbal behavior we're going to try and sum it up, if you will. We make an effort to understand and respect and appreciate others' nonverbal communication on their own terms. By recognizing and attempting to understand others' patterns of nonverbal behavior, we may increase appreciation for individual differences and be less rigidly restricting the expectations of nonverbal behaviors of others. This may also provide a greater range of communicative options. Interpreting others on their own terms might lead to clarification of misunderstandings and to develop communicative techniques to minimize future misunderstandings. It also enhances personal effectiveness by increasing the range of options that you have for communicating with different people. Well, that's going to complete our overview look at nonverbal gendered communication. Now, next, we'll be looking at the chapter called Becoming Gendered. How we use some of what we've already experienced in the course so far and apply it to how we become to understand masculinity and femininity in our society. All right, everybody. I hope this has been useful for you. I hope you're getting along well. We'll see you next week. Bye now.